The Galactic Military Academy's combat simulator, affectionately known as the Gauntlet, had a reputation that preceded it like a bad smell at a diplomatic function. For 300 years, it had humbled cadets from every corner of known space. The simulation had a 98% failure rate, and that remaining 2% only passed because they'd technically survived long enough for the timer to run out while hiding in a maintenance closet. Commander Velcrath stood in the observation deck, his forearms crossed in what he probably thought was an intimidating posture. It mostly made him look like he was hugging himself. A 7-foot-tall Crithian with scales that shimmered like oil on water, Velcrath had spent the last 3 months making it abundantly clear that humans were, in his professional opinion, the galactic equivalent of participation trophies. Cute that they'd joined the community, adorable that they wanted to play soldier, but ultimately about as threatening as a basket of puppies. "Cadet Webb," Velcrath announced, his voice dripping with the kind of condescension usually reserved for explaining basic addition to a rock. "You will now face the gauntlet. Try not to embarrass your species more than absolutely necessary." Marcus Webb, the only human at the Academy, and the subject of approximately 3 months of increasingly creative insults, stood at the simulator entrance looking like a man who'd been asked to calculate the square root of his own regret. At 5'10", with the kind of unremarkable features that made him blend into any Earth crowd, Marcus had spent his entire tenure at the Academy being compared unfavorably to literally every other species. Apparently, humans lacked the natural armor plating of the Draxians, the telepathic coordination of the Mindari, and the basic survival instincts of common fungi. Behind Velcrath, a crowd of Marcus's fellow cadets had gathered for the show. Torvik, a hulking reptilian warrior from Scalios Prime, was taking bets with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a guaranteed investment opportunity. 5 credits says the human doesn't last 10 minutes, Torvik hissed, his forked tongue flickering with excitement. "That's generous," chimed in Plina, a willowy Mindari whose telepathic abilities made her insufferably smug about knowing what everyone was thinking. Her 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture that somehow conveyed both pity and disgust. "I'm reading surface thoughts of confusion and something about breakfast? Is he seriously thinking about breakfast right now?" Marcus was, in fact, thinking about breakfast. Specifically, whether the Academy cafeteria would still have those weird purple pastries by the time he got out of this thing. They tasted like cinnamon mixed with static electricity, and he'd developed an unhealthy addiction to them. "The scenario is straightforward," Velcrath continued, consulting a holographic display. "You are inserted into hostile territory. Your mission is to gather intelligence on enemy positions, avoid detection, and extract safely. The simulation adapts to your decisions. Most cadets manage 47 minutes before catastrophic failure. The record holder, a Draxian battle master, survived for 3 hours using advanced stealth protocols and strategic patience. So basically, don't get caught and don't die," Marcus summarized. Velcrath's scales rippled in what might have been irritation. "If you wish to oversimplify centuries of tactical doctrine, yes." Marcus shrugged and stepped into the simulator pod. The door hissed shut behind him with the finality of a coffin lid. Around him, the observation deck's monitors flickered to life, showing multiple angles of what was about to unfold. "Beginning simulation in 3, 2, 1, announced an automated voice that sounded bored with its own existence. The world dissolved into light, and Marcus Webb vanished into what everyone assumed would be a very brief and entertaining disaster. Velcrath settled into his observation chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Perhaps after this humiliation, the human would finally understand his place in the galactic order. Perhaps he'd finally stop asking weird questions in tactical theory class about, what if we just didn't do it that way? Perhaps, Velcrath thought, this would be educational. He had no idea how right he was, or how much he was going to regret that thought in approximately 4 minutes. Marcus materialized in what appeared to be a war-torn cityscape that looked like someone had taken a normal city and introduced it to the concept of really bad decisions. Buildings leaned at angles that would make architects weep. Smoke curled from various craters. In the distance, the sound of weapons fire provided an ominous soundtrack that Marcus immediately tuned out because he was trying to orient himself. "Welcome, Cadet Webb," announced a smooth artificial voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I am Protocol 9, your simulation overseer. Your current location is Grid Reference 447 Alpha. Enemy forces control 87% of the operational theater. Your probability of mission success is calculated at 3.7%. Your probability of survival is notably lower." "That's a pretty specific number," Marcus observed, scanning his surroundings. "Do I get partial credit for trying?" Protocol 9 paused, possibly trying to determine if that was a serious question. "Your mission parameters are as follows. Navigate through the red zone, marked on your heads-up display. Avoid enemy patrols. Locate the intelligence cache at the coordinates being transmitted to your neural interface. Extract without detection." A glowing path appeared in Marcus's vision, highlighting a route that wound through approximately 2 miles of urban nightmare. It looked like the kind of path designed by someone who really wanted you to fail, but needed to maintain plausible deniability about it. Marcus studied the route for about 10 seconds. Then he looked up at the buildings around him, specifically at a partially collapsed structure that was leaning against its neighbor like a drunk friend at closing time. "Hey, Protocol 9, Marcus said, his tone conversational. "Quick question. What happens if I just knock that building down?" Protocol 9's pause was longer this time. "Clarification required. The mission parameters do not include structural demolition." "Yeah, but theoretically, that building falls, it takes out the one next to it, probably causes a pretty decent distraction, maybe even blocks some of those patrol routes you've got marked on my display." "Cadet Webb, the simulation is designed to test your infiltration and intelligence gathering capabilities, not your capacity for random destruction." Sure, but you didn't answer my question." In the observation deck, Velkrath leaned forward. "What is he doing?" "He's talking to Protocol 9, replied Lieutenant Maxis, a junior instructor who looked confused. "About knocking down buildings." "Why would he knock down buildings?" "The mission is stealth-based." "This makes no sense." Back in the simulation, Marcus had found what he was looking for: a fuel depot that the scenario designers had probably placed there as an environmental hazard to avoid. You know, like a responsible infiltrator would. "Okay, so if I redirect this fuel line," Marcus muttered to himself, examining the setup with the critical eye of someone who'd spent his teenage years figuring out which rules were actually important and which were just suggestions, "and use that construction equipment over there, yeah, this could work." "Cadet Webb," Protocol 9's voice had taken on a tone that could only be described as algorithmic concern. "You are deviating from optimal mission parameters. Enemy patrols are approaching your position. Stealth protocols recommend immediate concealment." "How many enemy patrols are there total?" 47 individual units distributed across the operational theater." "And they're following set patrol routes?" "Affirmative. Randomization within predictable parameters to simulate realistic enemy behavior." Marcus grinned. It was not a reassuring expression. "Cool. Hey, one more question. Can the enemies adapt to, let's say, unexpected environmental changes?" "Enemy AI operates within tactical doctrine appropriate to their civilization type. They respond to threats according to established military theory." "So that's a no." Protocol 9 did not respond, possibly because it was beginning to suspect it had made a terrible mistake somewhere in its programming. Marcus set to work with the kind of focused determination usually reserved for people who absolutely should not be left unsupervised. He found a heavy loader, the kind of machinery meant for moving construction materials. He found the fuel depot's main line. He found a structural support that looked like it had been one stiff breeze away from giving up on life anyway. In the observation deck, Torvik's confidence was beginning to waver. Why isn't he hiding? The patrol is literally 30 seconds from his position. "I don't know," Plina admitted, her telepathic senses straining. "His thoughts are, I don't even know how to describe this. It's like watching someone solve a jigsaw puzzle by eating the pieces. There's a logic there, but it's not a logic I understand. And why does he keep thinking about something called a Rube Goldberg machine?" Velkrath's 4 hands were now gripping his chair's armrests with enough force to leave permanent impressions. Someone tell me what he's doing. Marcus stepped back from his handiwork, admired it for a moment, and then activated the heavy loader. It lurched forward with all the grace of a drunk elephant, smashed into the structural support exactly as planned, and triggered a chain reaction that Protocol 9's processors were definitely not prepared for. The building came down. Then the building next to it came down. The fuel line ruptured, not enough to explode, but enough to create a massive smokescreen. Enemy patrols converged on the noise, following their programming, which meant they all converged on the same location, which meant they were now clustered in a very convenient target-rich environment that had nothing to do with Marcus' current position. "What?" Marcus said cheerfully, watching the chaos unfold. "Were you saying about a stealth approach?" Protocol 9's silence was deafening. The thing about artificial intelligence, Marcus reflected as he jogged through a now completely unguarded section of the operational theater, is that it's only as smart as the assumptions it's built on, and if those assumptions include the cadet will try to play by the rules, well, that's just poor planning. Protocol 9, to its credit, was trying. Cadet Webb, your actions have created 47 tactical anomalies in the simulation environment, attempting to compensate. "Don't strain yourself," Marcus called out, vaulting over a piece of rubble. The HUD in his vision was flashing warnings about unauthorized tactical approaches, which he was pretty sure was just Protocol 9's way of saying it was having feelings about this. Enemy forces began spawning in his path, trying to cut him off. They materialized with weapons raised, ready to engage in simulated combat, according to centuries of established tactical doctrine. Marcus immediately spotted a water main that had been damaged in his earlier chaos. Without breaking stride, he kicked it. Hard. The pipe burst, flooding the street with enough water to create a slip hazard that sent 3 enemy combatants tumbling like bowling pins. While they were down, Marcus grabbed a discarded piece of metal debris and wedged it into a nearby doorway at head height. 2 more enemies ran straight into it with the kind of comedic timing that would make a slapstick director weep with joy. "This is not tactically sound behavior," Protocol 9 observed, its tone suggesting it was having a bit of an existential crisis. "You are improvising with environmental elements not designated as tactical assets." "Everything's a tactical asset if you're creative enough," Marcus replied, now actively looking for more things to weaponize. He found a maintenance bot stuck in a corner, apparently part of the environmental dressing. He reactivated it and pointed it toward a cluster of enemies. The bot, following its core programming, tried to clean the area. The enemies, following their programming, tried to eliminate the perceived threat. The result was absolute chaos as combat AI tried to fight a janitor bot that just wanted to sweep. In the observation deck, the atmosphere had shifted from mockery to confused horror. "He's using a maintenance bot," Lieutenant Maxis said, his voice hollow, "as a weapon against trained combat forces." "I can see that," Velkrath snapped. "What I can't see is why it's working." Plina's 3 eyes had gone wide. "I'm trying to read his tactical reasoning, but it's like static and half-remembered memes and something about a video game called Minecraft. What's a Minecraft? Why is he comparing this to creative mode?" Torvik had stopped taking bets. In fact, Torvik was beginning to regret several life choices that had led him to this moment. "Commander, in all my warrior training across all the battle scenarios I've studied, I have never seen anyone approach combat like this. He's not fighting. He's trolling. He's trolling the simulation." Protocol 9 spawned more enemies, adjusting their tactics, trying to predict Marcus's movements. The problem was that Marcus's movements couldn't be predicted because they weren't following any known tactical framework. He was essentially playing a completely different game than the one the simulation was designed to run. Marcus found a gravity lift, meant to be used for extraction in the final phase of the mission. He activated it early, sending a trash container flying into the air. It came down on an enemy position like an improvised orbital strike. "Improvised orbital strike," Marcus muttered to himself. "I should write that down." "Your approach violates 14 separate articles of the Galactic Warfare Convention," Protocol 9 informed him, sounding distinctly stressed for an AI. "Good thing this is a simulation, then," Marcus replied cheerfully. The simulation's environment was beginning to show strain. Buildings flickered at their edges. Enemy pathfinding routines started glitching, sending combatants walking into walls. The carefully crafted war-torn aesthetic was developing tears in its rendering, like reality was having technical difficulties. Marcus reached a checkpoint that should have taken him 45 minutes to reach. He'd done it in 12. And he'd done it by essentially treating the entire scenario like a destructible environment puzzle, rather than a tactical infiltration mission. Velkrath's scales had gone from oil-slick iridescent to a dull gray that indicated extreme stress among Crithians. How is this happening? I believe, Lieutenant Maxis said slowly, the human is exploiting the fact that Protocol 9 assumes cooperative engagement with the scenario. The AI is designed to challenge tactics, not chaos. This isn't chaos, Plina corrected, her telepathic senses finally making some sense of Marcus's thoughts. It's a different kind of order, human order. It's terrifying. Back in the simulation, Marcus had just discovered that if you short out a power conduit near a force field, the force field doesn't just deactivate, it creates a feedback loop that overloads the entire grid section. He hadn't meant to discover this. He'd been trying to open a door. The resulting cascade of electrical failures opened 17 doors, deactivated 3 defensive turrets, and somehow activated the emergency sprinkler system in a building 3 blocks away. Oops, Marcus said without a trace of actual remorse. My bad. Protocol 9 had stopped offering tactical advice. It was now simply documenting everything for what sounded like a very strongly worded incident report. And Marcus Webb, the human everyone had dismissed as weak and tactically incompetent, jogged toward the final encounter with a smile on his face and absolutely no idea how much trouble he was causing. The final boss encounter in the Gauntlet simulation was supposed to be the ultimate test of everything a cadet had learned. It was positioned at a fortified command center, accessible only after navigating the entire theater of operations, usually approached from the south after a grueling 47-minute infiltration that left cadets desperate and low on resources. Marcus came in from the northwest through a hole in the wall he'd created using a malfunctioning gravity generator, approximately 43 minutes ahead of schedule, eating a ration bar he'd found in a supply crate that Protocol 9 had forgotten to despawn. The final boss, a heavily armored command mech designated Enemy Alpha Prime, turned to face this unexpected intrusion with the kind of delayed reaction that suggested its AI was frantically checking its notes. You are not supposed to be here yet, Protocol 9 said, and for the first time the AI sounded genuinely upset about it. Yeah, traffic was better than expected, Marcus replied, studying the mech with the analytical gaze of someone who had spent too much time taking apart electronics as a kid. Big guy, huh? Lots of weapons, probably shielded. Definitely programmed with some kind of adaptive combat routine. Enemy Alpha Prime raised its weapons, preparing to engage in a climactic battle that would test Marcus's combat skills, strategic thinking, and ability to adapt under pressure. Marcus looked around the command center, noted the various computer terminals, the power cores, the structural supports that were definitely over-engineered for what they needed to do, and made a decision that would haunt Protocol 9 for the rest of its operational existence. Hey, Protocol 9, quick question. If I access those terminals, can I change the command frequency for that mech? Silence. Then, slowly, carefully. Cadet Webb, that is not a viable tactical option. The terminals are encrypted. Even if you could access them, the mech's IFF systems would not allow override from. Marcus was already at the terminal. In the observation deck, 3 cybersecurity instructors materialized out of nowhere to watch what happened next. The encryption should take hours to crack, one of them whispered. It's military-grade 17-layer security protocol. Marcus typed for about 30 seconds, frowned, and tried something else. Huh, that's interesting. What's interesting? Protocol 9 asked with the tone of someone who really didn't want to know the answer. Your security is really good against sophisticated attacks, but it's not great against just like trying the default password. Did nobody change the admin credentials? Is the password seriously still Protocol 9 admin access? The silence in the observation deck was the kind of silence that happens when everyone simultaneously realizes they've made a catastrophic oversight. That password was supposed to be changed during initial setup, one of the cybersecurity instructors said faintly. 300 years ago. Nobody ever checked, added another, looking like they wanted to sink through the floor. Marcus was now scrolling through command options with the casual air of someone browsing a menu. Oh wow, you can do a lot with this. Hey, enemy Alpha Prime, do a little dance for me. The heavily armored combat mech designed to be the ultimate test of a cadet's combat prowess did a little dance. In the observation deck, Torvik made a sound like a dying accordion. Protocol 9 was experiencing what could only be described as an artificial intelligence's version of a breakdown. This is not how the simulation is supposed to function. You are supposed to engage in combat. You are supposed to utilize the tactics you've been taught. I am utilizing tactics, Marcus protested, now making the mech do jazz hands. They're just not the tactics you expected. This is cheating. This is creative problem solving. There's a difference. Velkrath had his head in all four hands. Make it stop, someone make it stop. But it was too late to stop. Marcus had discovered that with access to the command center's systems, he could essentially rewrite parts of the simulation on the fly. He didn't understand most of what he was doing, but he understood enough to be dangerous. He adjusted enemy spawn rates, accidentally created a logic loop where enemies would spawn, realize they were already at their destination, and despawn in confusion. The simulation's environment started really glitching now. Gravity became optional in certain zones. Textures failed to load, leaving checkerboard patterns floating in midair. A building rendered itself inside out. Enemy combatants began T-posing, stuck in their default positions as their AI gave up trying to process what was happening. Cadet Webb, Protocol 9 said, and its voice was doing something that could only be described as digital begging. Please stop. You are creating cascading errors in my core systems. I am a sophisticated military simulation AI, and you are making me question my existence. Is that a problem? Yes. That is philosophically and operationally a significant problem. Marcus looked at the chaos unfolding around him, the glitching environment, the T-posing enemies, the mech that was now stuck doing the shuffle dance on repeat, and experienced a moment of genuine confusion. Wait, am I winning? This feels too easy. Is this a trap? It's not a trap, Protocol 9 said miserably. You've just broken me. Congratulations. In 300 years of operation, nobody has ever broken me before. The simulation began its death throes in earnest. Physics stopped being a suggestion and became more of a vague concept. Colors inverted. The sky rendered as the ground and the ground rendered as a philosophical question. Somewhere in the code, an error log was generating reports faster than it could save them. And Marcus Webb, standing in the center of it all, took another bite of his ration bar and wondered if he'd actually failed somehow because this seemed way too easy. Simulation terminating, Protocol 9 announced with the relief of someone finally being allowed to quit a job they hated. Emergency shutdown initiated. Simulation integrity compromised beyond recovery. Please exit immediately before reality stops making sense entirely. Too late, Marcus muttered, watching a tree render itself as a floating mathematical equation. The world dissolved into white light, and Marcus found himself back in the simulator pod, which opened with a hiss that sounded vaguely accusatory. He stepped out, still holding his ration bar, and blinked at the crowd of stunned faces staring at him from the observation deck. So, he said into the silence, did I pass? The observation deck had the atmosphere of a funeral, where nobody was quite sure who had died, but everyone was certain someone was responsible. Marcus Webb stood in the center of the room, protein bar in hand, surrounded by what felt like every instructor and senior cadet in the entire academy. They were all staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to horror to existential dread. Commander Velkrath looked like he'd aged several decades in the past 17 minutes. His scales had gone completely dull, and his four arms hung limply at his sides in the Crithian gesture for complete defeat. Did you? Velkrath began, his voice barely above a whisper. Did you just break Protocol 9? Marcus glanced back at the simulator pod, which was now displaying an error message that simply read, Please no, in 17 different languages. I mean, it's probably just a bug, right? Have you tried turning it off and on again? A strangled sound came from somewhere in the back of the room. It might have been laughter. It might have been crying. It was hard to tell. Lieutenant Maxis was reviewing the simulation footage with the horrified fascination of someone watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. He completed the scenario in 17 minutes and 34 seconds. The previous record was 3 hours. He didn't follow a single tactical protocol. He weaponized a maintenance bot. He made the final boss do jazz hands. I saw the jazz hands, Velkrath said distantly. We all saw the jazz hands. Torvik approached Marcus with the careful steps of someone approaching an unexploded ordnance. Cadet Webb, I have a question. When you entered that simulation, were you trying to break it? No, Marcus said honestly. I was just trying to, complete the mission efficiently. Was I not supposed to use the available resources? The maintenance bot was not a resource. It was available, therefore it was a resource. Plina had given up trying to read Marcus' thoughts and was now just staring at him like he was a particularly complex puzzle that might bite. Your species is insane. You look at a carefully designed military exercise and see a sandbox. You see rules as suggestions. You see tactics as, guidelines? More like starting points, Marcus offered helpfully. The atmosphere in the room shifted as the door opened and Admiral Cross entered. The Admiral was a Xantharian, a species known for their wisdom, patience, and extremely long lifespans that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. Cross looked ancient and exhausted, with the air of someone who had seen everything and was tired of all of it. I've reviewed the footage, Cross said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who really wished he hadn't. All of it, twice. The second time was to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Admiral, I can explain. Velkrath started. Cross held up a hand. Commander, I'm not here to discipline you. I'm here because we have a much larger problem than a broken simulation. He turned to Marcus. Cadet Webb, do you understand what you've done? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Broken and expensive training program? In my defense, the security was really not great. You've exposed a fundamental flaw in our entire military doctrine, Cross interrupted. Protocol 9 was designed 3 centuries ago by the finest tactical minds in the galaxy. It was built on the foundation of civilized warfare, of established tactical theory, of predictable strategic frameworks. It assumed that anyone facing it would engage with it on those terms. Okay, Marcus said slowly. Humans, Cross continued, and there was something like weary respect in his voice. Don't engage on expected terms. You don't fight by the rules because apparently, you barely acknowledge the rules exist. You see a carefully balanced tactical scenario and treat it like a physics experiment. You're not unpredictable. You're operating on a completely different logical framework. Around the room, the implications were beginning to sink in. Torvik's eyes had gone wide. If one human with no real training can dismantle our premier tactical simulation, what could a trained human military force do to our defensive strategies? That, Cross said heavily, is exactly the question that's going to keep the Council awake for the foreseeable future. Velkrath looked like he might faint, which was impressive for a species that didn't typically faint. The defensive grid, the orbital platforms, the border patrol patterns, they're all built on the same tactical assumptions that Protocol 9 used. Correct, Cross confirmed. We've spent centuries perfecting warfare against opponents who think like us, and then humans show up, and they don't think like us at all. They think like, what did the report say? He consulted a data pad. They think like someone playing a video game where the objective is to see how creatively they can break the intended experience. That's not fair, Marcus protested. I was just trying to solve the problem. That's what makes it terrifying, Plina said quietly. You don't even realize how abnormal your approach is. To you, this is just problem solving. To us, it's like watching someone casually violate the laws of physics because they didn't know they were supposed to be laws. Cross pulled up the simulation footage on the main display, freezing it on the moment where Marcus had made enemy Alpha Prime do a little dance. Cadet Webb, I'm going to ask you a question and I need you to answer honestly. If you were facing a real military threat, an actual combat scenario, would you approach it the same way you approached this simulation? Marcus thought about it. I mean, probably. If there's a problem, you use what's available to solve it. You adapt. You improvise. You don't just follow the plan if the plan isn't working. The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Cross sighed, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. Commander Velcrath, you are to cease all training exercises involving Cadet Webb until further notice. The simulation bay is closed for extensive repairs and what I'm going to call aggressive re-evaluation of our entire tactical training program. And Cadet Webb? Velcrath asked. Cross looked at Marcus with an expression that mixed respect, fear, and resignation. Cadet Webb receives a commendation for creative problem-solving and a formal warning to please, for the love of everything we consider sacred, stop breaking things. I'll try, Marcus offered. That's what worries me, Cross muttered. The emergency meeting of the Academy's senior staff took place in a secure conference room that had probably hosted discussions about interstellar threats, military coups, and budget allocation disputes. It had never hosted a discussion quite like this one. So let me make sure I understand the situation, said General Thrax, a decorated war hero from the Krell Empire who looked like he could bench press a tank. One human cadet, in his first real tactical simulation, broke a 300-year-old training program that has successfully tested over 500,000 cadets from 400 different species. Correct, Admiral Cross confirmed, and he did this not through any advanced technique or superior training, but by essentially treating the entire scenario like a destructible playground. Also correct. And our conclusion from this is that humans are tactically insane. That's one way to phrase it, Cross said diplomatically. I prefer operating on a fundamentally different strategic paradigm, but yes, General Thrax leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. When the Council approved humanity's application to join the galactic community, I thought the biggest problem would be their tendency to pack bond with anything that moves. Nobody mentioned they were chaos incarnate. Back in the cadet quarters, Marcus had become a minor celebrity and major source of anxiety. His classmates now treated him with a mixture of awe and the kind of caution usually reserved for unstable explosives. Torvik found him in the common area, studying a tactical manual with an expression that suggested he was reading it for entertainment value, rather than educational purposes. Webb, Torvik said carefully, I need to ask you something. When you look at a tactical scenario, what do you see? Marcus looked up from his reading. Opportunities, problems to solve, I don't know why. Because when I look at a tactical scenario, I see established approaches, proven methods, doctrine developed over generations. You look at the same scenario and see Legos. Legos are great for problem solving, Marcus pointed out. That's my point, you're terrifying. Plina materialized from around a corner, her telepathic senses apparently drawn to the conversation. The instructors are having a breakdown, you know. Protocol 9 isn't the only thing you've broken. You've broken their worldview. I didn't mean to, Marcus protested. I was just trying to pass the simulation. You didn't just pass it, you demolished it, danced on its grave, and made everyone question their life choices, Plina said. The entire academy is now split between people who want to study you like a lab specimen and people who want to lock you in a room with no sharp objects. That seems excessive. You made a combat mech do jazz hands, Marcus. Jazz hands. Down in the command center, Admiral Cross was presenting his findings to the Academy board via holographic conference. The board members, representing the major military powers of the galactic community, looked various shades of concerned. The implications are clear, Cross explained, displaying a tactical breakdown of Marcus's approach. Our current defensive doctrines assume opponents will engage within recognizable strategic frameworks. Humans don't. They innovate in real time, improvise with available resources, and seem to have no psychological barrier against unconventional tactics. Are you suggesting, asked a board member from the Thalassian Confederacy, that we need to redesign our entire military strategy because of one cadet's simulation performance? I'm suggesting, Cross replied carefully, That if humanity ever becomes hostile, we are catastrophically unprepared. But more importantly, I'm suggesting that as allies, humans represent a tactical asset we've never encountered before. They solve problems we didn't know could be solved. By breaking things, another board member added. By thinking differently, Cross corrected. There's a human saying, if it's stupid, but it works, it's not stupid. We need to understand that mindset. Back at the academy, Marcus had been summoned to Velcrath's office. The commander sat behind his desk, looking like he'd spent the last few hours contemplating the futility of existence. Cadet Webb, Velcrath began. I owe you an apology. Marcus blinked. Sir, for 3 months I treated you as inferior because humans lack the physical advantages of other species. I assumed tactical incompetence based on that assessment. I was wrong. Velcrath's scales shifted color, indicating deep discomfort. You're not tactically incompetent. You're tactically unorthodox to a degree that borders on weaponized creativity. Is that a compliment? I genuinely don't know anymore, Velcrath admitted. What I do know is that the Academy has decided to create a new tactical training program. It's going to focus on unconventional problem-solving, adaptive strategy, and thinking outside established frameworks. That sounds good, Marcus said cautiously. You're going to teach it. I'm sorry, what? You're going to teach other cadets how to think like a human, Velcrath said, with the air of someone announcing their own execution. Admiral's orders. Starting next week, you'll run workshops on creative tactical problem solving. Marcus stared. I barely know what I'm doing half the time. Yes, and that's apparently the point. Your instinct to improvise, to adapt, to question established approaches, that's what we need to teach. Because if we don't learn to think like humans, we'll never understand how to work with humans in combined operations. Over the following days, word spread throughout the galaxy's military networks. The story of the human cadet who broke the gauntlet became something of a legend, told in hushed tones in tactical academies across known space. Protocol 9 was eventually restored to operation, but with significant updates. The security passwords were changed. The AI was programmed to expect unconventional approaches. A new difficulty setting was added, labeled simply Human Mode, which disabled half the environmental safeties and allowed for aggressive improvisation. Nobody had beaten Human Mode yet. Most cadets couldn't even get past the first 5 minutes because they kept trying to apply traditional tactics to a scenario that rewarded chaos. Marcus's first teaching session was attended by 27 cadets from 15 different species, all of whom looked at him with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright fear. He stood at the front of the classroom, feeling wildly underqualified, and decided to just be honest. Okay, so full disclosure, I have no idea what I'm doing, he began. The cadets exchanged glances, but apparently that's the point. The thing about human tactical thinking is that we don't really have a unified theory of how to approach problems. We just kind of look at what's available and figure out what happens if we combine things in ways they weren't meant to be combined. Torvik raised a claw. That sounds like a recipe for disaster. It absolutely is, Marcus agreed cheerfully. But it's also a recipe for solutions nobody else would think of. Here's an exercise. I'm going to give you a scenario, and I want you to tell me the most ridiculous way you can think of to solve it. Not the tactical way, not the proper way, the weird way. By the end of the first session, he had cadets suggesting using waste disposal systems as infiltration routes, weaponizing cleaning supplies, and one particularly creative Draxian proposed using emergency life support systems to create a distraction by making everyone think there was a hull breach. See, Marcus said, you're getting it. You're thinking like humans. I feel dirty, the Draxian admitted. That's how you know it's working. 3 weeks after the incident, Admiral Cross submitted his final report to the Galactic Military Council. The conclusion was simple and terrifying. Humanity represented the most significant shift in military doctrine in 3 centuries, not because of superior technology or overwhelming force, but because of fundamentally different cognitive approaches to problem solving. The recommendation was equally simple. integrate human tactical advisors into all major military planning operations, update defensive protocols to account for unconventional attacks, and never ever give humans access to systems without changing the default passwords. Marcus Webb continued his training at the academy, now with a reputation that preceded him like a warning label. He became the go-to consultant for impossible problems, the cadet you called when traditional approaches had failed. He developed a following of students who wanted to learn the human way of thinking, and a parallel following of instructors who wanted to make sure he stayed away from anything important. On a quiet evening, about a month after breaking Protocol 9, Marcus found himself back at the simulator bay. The facility had reopened with extensive modifications and enough warning labels to wallpaper a small building. He stood outside the entrance looking at the pod that had started everything. Velcrath appeared beside him, all forearms loaded with data pads. "Cadet Webb, I thought you'd be celebrating. Your unorthodox approach has been officially recognized by the Council as a valid tactical framework." "Yeah, about that," Marcus said. "I wanted to apologize. I really didn't mean to cause this much trouble." Velcrath was quiet for a moment, his scales shifting through several colors that indicated deep thought. "Do you know what the most humbling part of this experience has been for me? The jazz hands? Besides the jazz hands, it's been realizing that for 300 years we've been so confident in our tactical superiority that we stopped questioning our own assumptions. We built systems designed to test cadets against known problems, but we never considered that the biggest threat might be someone who doesn't recognize the problems as problems in the first place." "I'm not sure that's a compliment." "It's an observation," Velcrath said. "Humans are going to change the galaxy, Cadet Webb. Not through conquest or superior firepower, but by making everyone else rethink everything they thought they knew. And honestly," his scales flickered with what might have been amusement, "I'm not sure we're ready for it. For what it's worth, we're not sure we're ready for you guys either. I still don't understand half the stuff in the tactical manual." "Yes, but the difference is that doesn't stop you from solving the problem anyway." Velcrath shifted his data pads. "I have a question, purely hypothetical. If you were to run the gauntlet again, now that Protocol 9 has been updated to expect your approach, what would you do differently?" Marcus grinned. "Nice try, Commander. But I'm pretty sure the Academy has suffered enough for one semester." "That's what I was afraid of," Velcrath muttered. As Marcus walked away from the simulator bay, heading toward the mess hall where those weird purple pastries were probably waiting, he passed a group of junior cadets huddled around a datapad. They were watching footage of his simulation run, analyzing it frame by frame. "See, right there," one of them was saying. "He doesn't even check his surroundings. He just commits to the idea and makes it work through sheer audacity." "Is that a teachable skill?" another asked. "I don't think so. I think you have to be slightly insane." Marcus smiled and kept walking. Behind him, the simulator bay stood quiet, its systems upgraded, its AI traumatized but functional, its reputation forever changed by 17 minutes of absolute chaos. And somewhere in the galactic military networks, tactical planners were updating their threat assessment protocols, adding a new category they'd never needed before: human factor. Expect unconventional approaches. Prepare for anything. Change your passwords. The galaxy, it turned out, was going to need a much bigger instruction manual.